So it's 1 o'clock. Perhaps everybody's back with us, but I thought maybe we could take a few minutes just to maybe cover some of the questions. Again, we got lots of questions. I apologize if we don't answer your question, but if you're okay, David, maybe we could just throw a few questions out there, and then I do a few announcements, and then we'll start the next lesson. Someone asked, can you sneakily disciple people, or do you have to tell them your end goal?
You can sneak it in.
Yeah. Ninja discipleship, or
you and God can talk about the end goal. It depends on who it is, but it's like when my little atheist guy, which is what I called him, he laughed at that. He was okay with it. I told him early on, I said, okay, I'm committed to you until you are a full follower of Jesus who plants churches. And he said, I don't even believe in God, so I don't think I'm going to plant a church. And I said, well, that's the goal. I want you to become a church planter. That you're so converted to Jesus, you're out making disciples and planting churches. And he said, okay. But that was an extraordinary case. He knew what I was up to. I was the preacher and all that. But let me put it this way. Even if you don't start out with your neighbor by saying, hey, I want you to be a full-fledged follower of Jesus by the time this is over with, which sounds like you're using them. That's how they'll feel. What you can say is, I've discovered some really awesome things, and I'm just going to live them with you and let you have some of the blessings of them. I'm going to let you experience the blessing of the forgiveness I've experienced. And so you're at least in some sense, so on the one hand, you're not using people. Like, we don't use people. We're not utilitarian. We love them. But at the same time, it's not a mistake to say, because I know Jesus, I love everybody, including you, and let's just be friends.
Yeah, and that speaks to just your idea of these are relationships you're building. Yeah. You're not just picking a stranger off the street and bringing the Bible to them right away. You're building relationships with the people in your community, and through that, there's a process that leads to those discussions.
Yeah, but I'm okay with just picking the stranger off the street. But I'm suggesting that the more Jesus-like way is the way of building those relationships and living life with them for the purpose of having them become more like Jesus.
Right. And there's a lot of parents here too in this group, so they're thinking about discipling their children. What advice do you have for parents who are discipling their children, especially those who refuse to be obedient and show responsibility? How can parents balance love and discipline?
The first advice is to recognize that your children are your first discipleship priority. They're more important than anybody else. That's that circle is the first circle God gave you. So yeah, I'm glad you're asking that. That's what you should do. We've already talked about don't just teach them to love the church, which is a good thing to do, but help them to see Jesus. And you help them to see Jesus, first of all, by modeling it for them. They're going to become a lot more what you are than they are what you say. So if you're, if you live a life of worry and frustration, and you're harsh, and you're, it's hard to see you happy, and you're not real satisfied with what they're up to, and they hardly ever see that encouragement, that praise, then it doesn't matter what you say, they're probably not going to see the joy of Jesus. And so that's actually hard, because as a parent, you just usually just a lot more of who you already are. But you need to think through what message. If I'm the Jesus that my kids see, then what do they see in Jesus? Because you're their Jesus. What do they see? And they need to see someone who's filled with joy, who practices discipline, but discipline there's a certain kind of Christian discipline, which essentially says, have very few rules, but don't back down on the ones that matter. Just don't back down on them. When our kids were little, we had 6 rules in the house. That was all we had, 6. And we didn't have 483, we had 6. But we didn't back down on those 6. And, there was a stretch in my life where I didn't want to talk about parenting, because I've already told you one of my most painful stories. But I'm in a place now where, God was really good to us. We celebrated, we had joy. We tried to be fair. We tried to be just like Jesus for them. Not just like a good church member, but like Jesus. That's the best advice I could give.
A lot of young people today, especially with the pandemic and many other factors too are experiencing anxiety and depression and things. Maybe, David, you could speak about regarding them, but also just in general, how Jesus as King addresses anxiety and depression.
And I've tried to be really honest with my church about these things, because there's still this pale in the air that suggests that if you have either depression or anxiety, or, you know, not to mention things like bipolarism and other either mental health issues or personality disorders, there's a thing that says, well, that's because you're not spiritual or because you don't have enough faith. And I wanted my congregation to know that that's not true. Certainly it's not always true. And so I think I said this last night, I wasn't clinically diagnosed as depressed, but I was. And MD just didn't want to put that on the records because he thought it would affect me down the road. But I was treated for depression. And the 4 things I learned about depression that are really important is one, your body really matters, what you do with your body. So if you're eating horribly, if you're not working out, if you're not exercising, if you're treating your body poorly, you're making yourself more susceptible to depression. And depression is a physiological disease. Something physical is literally happening in your brain. It's not just, I don't feel good. Your brain is literally not making the kinds of chemicals that it requires in order to keep you balanced. So what you do with your body has a big effect on that. So one thing is make sure you treat your body right. I lost probably 40 pounds during the depression because I tried, and it actually contributed greatly to my recovery. The second thing is your relationships really matter. And so to some extent, you might have to get your relationships right. You know, there's all kinds of issues here. If you're in a terrible marriage, you know, that's going to be a real problem for you. If you've got issues from the past, you know, goodness, so many of us have mom and daddy issues in the past, and those can be really difficult problems, but they're ones that can be overcome. And good 12-step programs actually can help you with that. I would look into things like Celebrate Recovery. We have a Celebrate Recovery at our church. These are 12-step programs that help you let go of relational issues. A third thing is counseling. So I took a lot of counseling, and I would say spiritual counseling. So prayer that is designed to break the bondage, because a lot of depression is physical, but also the devil gets hold of that and he starts lying to you. And he says, the reason you're like this is because you're worthless, or the reason you're like this is because you're such a sinner. See, God never did love you. It's all a big hoax. It's a lie. So the devil's lying to you. So you need somebody who cares enough about you to intercede for you with counseling and intercessory prayer, bondage breaking prayer. And then the last thing is medication. So, you know, if you're really struggling with anxiety and depression, go talk to your healthcare provider. You know, if you had a heart disease, you would take medication for it. If you had cancer, you'd take medication for it. Well, depression, many of our mental disorders they're physical. It's not just mental, it's physical. It's actually happening to the cells in your body, and medications can really help. So I actually, when I had, it's 2008 when I really had just a meltdown, emotional meltdown. And by the way, I kept preaching the whole time, which was weird. But I took some generic form of Lexapro, and for a couple of months, I took a generic form of Xanax, which really helped my anxiety. And I'm not ashamed of it, because it was a physical illness. It may be brought on by circumstances, but so is heart disease. It's brought on by circumstances too, like a lot of McDonald's in some cases. So it may be circumstantial, but it's still a physical thing. It's actually happening to your body, not just your brain. So those are things that I would suggest. Jesus can set you free from it, but I will say, oftentimes he sets us free, but we just won't accept his freedom. Like some of our mental things are our friends, and we just don't want to admit it. So I still have some anxiety issues, but the truth is, I think I like it. I don't want to, I hate to admit that, but I think I like worrying because I think it makes me more aggressive. It makes me more competitive. It's like it's the energy I use to keep pushing hard. And so I'm not sure I want to let go of it. Even though Jesus has set me free, I kind of still wear the yoke. And so at this point, I can't blame him. At this point, it's kind of my decision. Another long answer, sorry.